grief in the workplace, that is a communications challenge long before it becomes a human resources one. And I'm not saying HR isn't involved. Of course they are. And they're succinctly involved. What does that mean to say that it's a comms challenge, and why is this distinction so important?
Well, when someone experiences a loss, the first challenge that shows up is a human one, not an HR policy one. And the moment where a colleague returns to work, people aren't sure what to say, how to acknowledge the loss, how to support them in those early days, early weeks, and even early months. So that uncertainty and hesitation or silence can be a real communication challenge. So when communication is avoided or rushed, mismanaged, the ripple effect can quickly become an organizational conflict. And so there can be performance concerns, conflicts that arise, taking more time off work, having to have a leave. And so then we can see more complex HR issues. And so the distinction matters because it shifts the focus where the impact begins, which is what you described, is with the people. It's a human impact. And when grief is approached first as a communication challenge, then leaders and colleagues can be invited to respond with more presence, flexibility, compassion, instead of relying solely on policy and procedures. When we lead with human-centered communication, then we can prevent some of those situations from ever becoming a complex HR issue. And grief is long before grief is human long before it's administrative. And so how we communicate in those early days, that's what's most important. And it builds trust. Yeah.
Cindy, we operate in the world of communications, and one of the most difficult situations for so many of us, whether you're in the world of PR or not, is when somebody close to you has lost someone. And then all of a sudden we're stumped for words. We don't know what to say, how to say it, when to say it. And often we end up with these sort of, generic, thinking of you, you're in our prayers. And we just wanted to understand, Cindy, from your perspective, from your expertise, what's the best way for people to communicate, whether it's a friend, a colleague, an acquaintance? How can we find our way to show our support using words and gestures in a way that's meaningful? Because so many of us, we end up avoiding because we don't know what to do and what to say.
Well, I think about this, really what you're talking about almost is a communication framework. And can we bring that into the workplace? And I think about, I developed a 3C model. It's a grief-informed communication approach, not only for leaders, but for colleagues. So we begin by asking about consent and clarity. What do you want your team to know? How much detail feels okay for you? This is for the bereaved colleague coming back into the workplace. And how would you like that information shared? Would you like it emailed? Do you want us to have a meeting, or do you want us to share it individually? And this can prevent assumptions and protects emotional boundaries, and it sets a respectful tone for everyone involved. And one thing that I would even say is more important is this cultivating grief competency. So this is the grief literacy. And I strongly recommend for leaders to gather their team and talk about briefly to understand what to expect and notice. And then this helps us become more comfortable with language. So if we look at when you're bereaved, you're impacted physically, cognitively, emotionally, spiritually, and socially. And so there are things like reduced focus for cognition, forgetfulness, slower processing. Physically, we're exhausted. There's fatigue that shows up. And socially, there can be strained interactions, shifting identity for the bereaved colleague, and then questioning beliefs under that spirituality. So when we can start to expand our grief literacy, then it begins to support how we are connecting with the colleague that comes in. So helpful language can be things like, say the person's name, if that feels okay. And if it's a partner loss or a spousal loss, I'm thinking of you, and I just can't imagine what it's like since your husband Dan died. Using the person's name or a sibling loss, that is very helpful. Asking gentle, manageable questions. How is your morning going? Instead of, that's a nice replacement, instead of how are you? So bringing it down into really concise, how's your afternoon going? I'm happy you're back. Acknowledge the experience. I can't imagine how difficult this is for you, and I just want you to know I'm here for you. And when we're looking at supportive actions, those are simple things, can be simple things. So dropping off comforting items. I remember when my first husband passed away, and this was 20 years ago, and I still remember this, is colleagues brought over a wooden crate that had fresh bagels, cream cheese, and fresh fruit in it. I got all the well-meaning casseroles, and I don't want to put that over on the other side, but I have to share that I didn't eat a lot of those casseroles after. Part of it is, of course, you can't eat sometimes the amount of food that is that's getting brought, and it goes into the freezer. And then afterwards, it's not really you take it out and it's, So I found that fresh food, skip the dishes card, like meal cards, can be easier than someone having to find places to put things in their freezer. Childcare, pets, pet care, errands. I'm going to the grocery store. Often I'll say this, if there's a loss in our family or our friend circle, I'm headed to the grocery store. Do you need any staples? Instead of, do you need anything? Can I go to the grocery store for you? I found that there's a good response of, this is where I did, and can I do this for you? Shovel your driveway, cut your lawn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that. So really to be specific rather than that sort of vague, what can I do? How can I help? How can I support? So really go down to sort of specifics. And also I love the learning that we just, you generously shared with us, that it's really about not asking these big, wide open questions, but sort of narrowing it down again. So for instance, how's your day? How's your afternoon? How's your morning? So into sort of manageable questions, because as you said, grief can cognitively impair, and you don't want these big, blousy questions. You actually want small, bite-sized gestures, small, bite-sized questions, rather than tackle these huge sort of questions. That's really interesting, Cindy.
It's difficult because I think of when we come into an office, we get an evacuation procedures. And what if we had in our office a manual that talked about how to respond to a bereaved colleague, put it into your friend, you begin to get that literacy of, if you know that some people dive right into work and they may not want to talk about their loss, that would be what we would call a thinking style griever. That's somebody who processes through thinking. So they may not be talking so much about their loss. You likely won't see tears or a sad face. And if you're a feeling style griever, then you will be somebody who, think of somebody who wears their heart on their sleeve, and you'll want to talk about your loss, and you'll know that they're sad, and likely they'll have tears. They'll be able to show their emotions in public, and both are right. And this is from Kenneth Doka's work in the late 90s. He actually came up with these two styles of grievers. And of course, you can oscillate between the two. So what would it be like if we as human beings were more equipped? And then would we be able to feel a little more comfortable, not so awkward, not so afraid to, want to sideline the loss or bright side it? And we may be less prone to say platitudes, so we may avoid things like at least, anything that starts with at least. They're in a better place. Things that
No more pain.
yeah, they're not suffering anymore. And in my private practice and teams and groups that I'm working with, I always say, if the bereaved, grieving person says those things, then great, because it's coming from them, as opposed to us, because we don't really know, and it's difficult. They are well-meaning, because we don't intend, our intention isn't to hurt people that are suffering. It's uncomfortable, and it can be awkward.
Cindy, I think most people who choose to listen to this episode probably have understanding, or at least empathy, for the subject matter, and probably have a concept of how they would respond, and everything you're saying is making sense. But for the person, and I think it's probably a smaller percentage, for the person who sucks at this and they don't show emotion at work, and all they do is joke around with coworkers, and my God, now they can't joke around, but they took a shot and they clicked play on this episode just in the hopes that you would give them some magic pixie dust words that will make it acceptable. What would you say to that person who's listening, because they know they're terrible at it?
Pixie dust words. Well, I think part of that is, I'm really sorry for your loss. Is that because there's nothing wrong with saying that. I'm really sorry. This must be really hard. Or I'm really sorry for your loss. And I think that is really acceptable. And if we just think of even that one thing.
When your husband passed, what was the one thing that one person said to you that you still remember?
Ooh, I think it was more, Doug, the actions that I remember. And when I came home from the hospital, when I left my husband there, of course, and he wanted to be an organ donor, and he did go on to save 5 people's lives with his organs after. And when I showed up in that driveway and I had to get out of the car and I had to go into the house, when I stepped in, there was 5 people in my living room. And one of those 5 people was the president of the company that I worked with in the energy sector here in Calgary. And that was the beginning of the building block for me to feel like there was a space and place for my grief, in that I felt supported. And I know that every leader and president of a company cannot do that. But I think there are things we can do that make that difference in somebody's life. And for me, I found that I probably had more of the platitudes, because at that young age and in that age group and demographics, I think it was harder for people to relate to that kind of loss, because we were, of course, so young. And some people won't know what to say. And I don't think that we need to, I don't think we want to judge or shame that person for not knowing, because the truth is, we might have to steer another way. And you know, because it's not all going to be on paper. Grief doesn't work that way. It is so unique and everybody's different.
So it really starts with empathy, Cindy. And that's really the bedrock of all communication, is to understand that grief, like many of life's instances, there is a process. And that process isn't the same for everybody. As you said, you have the thinkers and the feelers. So people process grief in different ways. So having the understanding that there are nuanced reactions to grief, understanding that there are some commonalities in terms of that process, taking the time to read about it. And in an age of ChatGPT, there's really no excuse. And then it also is about working with your colleagues when they're coming back to the workforce, and again, giving them control and putting them in the driving seat in terms of asking who should know, how, what communication channels, what tone, so they really feel that they are included rather than feeling blindsided. And again, it's that understanding and that empathy, knowing that, you know, some people would want everyone to know and others wouldn't want anybody to know.
Right.
And just understanding that human diversity that exists in how people process grief and how they want it communicated around them. So it's really comms 101. It starts with empathy.
I love that. And I love how you brought in the thinking and feeling style person, because it reminds me of Doug's question. And if you know you're more of a thinking style person, and we usually know, because not everybody has a lot of empathy. Some people actually have to learn emotional intelligence, and we see coaches and companies. I mean, emotional intelligence is a big one these days, and bringing that into companies. And how do we become emotionally intelligent if we're not born that way? So going back to Doug's question, if you know that you're more of a thinking style person, what your superpower would be is the to-dos. And so what can I do? What can I bring? What can I give? And if you're, you know, the feeling type person, style person, and you have that emotional intelligence, you would maybe be the one that could bring naturally that empathy. And so that's really, really important. And thank you for, you know, sort of wrapping it up so beautifully like that.
And also, I think it's also about being compassionate and generous. So if it's not your natural style, but, you know, your friend or your colleague just needs you to switch styles a bit, then, you know, lean in and listen. Because actually, I think that's the ultimate of love, is taking yourself out of your natural comfort zone and just being and shape-shifting into the person that the other person needs for that moment, for that comfort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. If you're not a hugger, be a hugger.
Are we allowed?
Yeah, that's...
Well, you're not.
Yeah.
Oh, come on. See, that's sexism.
We can.
Thanks for your time today, Cindy.